Hi, I'm Sarami, and today I have something a little different, as I usually do. You all know that I really love doing an experiment, and so I really wanted to learn what the best method of sewing elastic on for underwear making is. So I did a little experiment. Okay, I'm just going to very briefly interrupt this video just to show you some of the underwear I've made, and I'll show you again later on in the video too, just so you have a point of reference, because I do cover lots of different methods. And so these are four of the lots of underwear I just sewed after doing that experiment. And you'll see I still used a lot of different methods, so just bear that in mind. And you'll see that there are lots of ways to get your underwear sewn, and they all turn out really great. But there is a method that definitely encourages the most stretch of all of them, and I'm going to share that with you. So on to the experiment. If you search the internet for the best way to sew picot or fold over elastic onto underwear, you don't really get much information on what method is the best. There's plenty of how-tos, and many will get the job done. They're technically accurate, but they lack some subtlety that will help you make the best choices and decisions when you're sewing underwear. I recently wanted to batch sew a lot of underwear. I planned on using all the pesky knit scraps I have, since those are the hardest to utilize in scrap busting projects. I can find uses for scrap woven fabrics, but knits are trickier. Underwear are a great solution. I thought I had decided the best way to sew underwear, but really I had only determined my favorite way to sew them, and sometimes those two things differ. I personally love the look and feel of fold over elastic, but I also found myself grabbing the underwear with the picot edge more often, even though my picot was a tiny bit rough. It had more stretch, so I really liked it. Because I wanted to use those existing fabrics and elastics I currently had in my stash, I decided that maybe what I'd try was sewing my fold over elastic as picot, meaning I'd keep it folded and attach it in one layer as if it's picot. It's elastic and I can use it any way I want, right? But it got me wondering, what really is the best way to attach it that will encourage the most stretch? There's nothing worse than putting on anything stretchy and maxing out the stretch when putting your leg through a hole. So using my fold over elastic idea as a starting point for my experiment, I decided to make it more official. I tested fold over elastic versus braided versus picot, and I used zigzag versus cover stitch versus overlock as my methods and combinations of all of those. But don't worry, I'm going to simplify it down and give you the skinny. There are three major variables when sewing underwear elastic if we're talking mostly about stretch. Number one, the type of elastic you're using. Picot, fold over elastic, or braided, and of course those can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Number two, the fabric. The stretchier the fabric, the stretchier the end result of your elastic. And number three, sewing method. There are two-step methods for elastics like picot and braided, and one-step methods for fold-over elastic. And it might be a really good time to make sure we understand that picot edge elastic is the one with the little decorative edge on it, just like this. You can see those little loops. So this is usually a picot elastic. I think this one's knitted. You can kind of see through it when I stretch it. So that's a picot edge, and sometimes they're more decorative and sometimes they're not. This is also a picot. It's much firmer. I think this is maybe a braided, not sure. And the other kind of elastic that you would sew in on the edge and probably use most of the same types of techniques is a braided elastic. And so I have this piece here just as a really big version so you can see what braided looks like. Can you see these horizontal grooves? That's a very good hallmark of braided elastic. But I used a 3/8 inch wide, really narrow. And as far as fold over elastic, it took me a while to figure out when people were saying FOE what that meant. FOE means fold over elastic, so now you know, just in case you've been afraid to ask. Fold over elastic comes usually in two different ways. This one is not folded yet, but it has this little score down the middle. You can kind of see it wants to fold that way. And I think in general, this shiny side would be the outside, but you could put it with the other side. So this is just this stuff that comes flat. This one's very cheap. And then this one, I kind of like, this one is already folded. So it's already put into this folded shape here. And it makes it really easy because when you do a one-step process for this, you know one side's going to land on top of the other, right? This is great. So basically, I tried 4 methods for the braided and the Picot style elastic to attach them. And so the basic way I did it was I tried attaching the elastic onto the fabric with a zigzag, and then that way I would do it to the right side, and then it would be turned to the back side and then top stitched on with either cover stitch or zigzag. So that's 2 methods, and it would look something like this right here. If you can kind of see, there's the little picot edge peeking right out from the back, and then this one was zigzagged on. And then this was attached to the fabric with a zigzag as well, which is pretty hard for you to tell, especially on this fabric and now that it's completely sewn. But that's what that would be like. This one here was overlocked on and zigzagged on. So same type of second step. The first step is what's different on this one. And then the other way I did it was with a zigzag, attaching it with a zigzag, attaching it with the overlock, and then finishing it with cover stitch. And so that's what this is right here. You can see there's those 2 rows of parallel stitches. That is the hallmark of a cover stitch. And then each of these was attached either using the overlock or a zigzag. And it's really hard to tell, but that's how those were sewn. And so I did that with Picot, and I did that with the braided elastic, except for one of the braided elastics, what I did was I overlocked it on and I turned it to the inside so it's nice and clean on the inside, and I zigzagged it. You can see that. So just ignore the other side there. There's a lot of experiments here. And then here's a really good example of the cover stitch finish on this. And this is just the braided elastic. It's just would be against the skin here. And then this little straight edge would be sticking out, which I think is suitable in a lot of cases. The Picot edging is really cute, but it's not completely necessary. As for the fold over elastic, the 2 methods I did, since fold over is usually attached in a 1-step method. Yes, people do it in 2 steps, but theoretically you're supposed to do it in 1 step because it's to aid you in saving some time, and it's a nice clean finish way to do it. And so I did that with a zigzag and with the cover stitch. So you can see this one here was attached in 1 step with the cover stitch. That contrast thread is really unflattering, I know, but it's very visible, which is nice. And then this one here I attached with the zigzag. So those are the 2 methods I used, and then I had 2 different fold overs, so I tried this fold over elastic too. This is this flat one right here. So you can see it's a high number of variables for such a simple garment. It takes 10 minutes to sew a pair of underwear, but will you wear them if you don't figure out all this other stuff first? So before I go further, I want to share a few things so we're all on the same page, in good experiment fashion. How I measure and calculate stretch. So I use a 10-inch length. I hold it static, and I also do it in the middle. So I'll usually take a piece and I'll stretch it a few times just to kind of get it a little bit, ready. Because I do find that if you just measure it cold and then go and measure it again, it will change. So do it a few times because that's how it's going to be on the body, right? And then I usually will, if I really want to be accurate, I'll actually mark it on the piece of fabric or elastic, whatever I'm doing. I'll mark the 10-inch length, and I'm sorry, this is all in imperial, but you can do your own in metric as well, and metric's probably a lot easier. So then I take my little piece here, and I don't start from the cut edge here because I need something to grab onto, and it's the same with fabric. I usually measure from the middle of fabric. And so I'll hold it here. And so if this 10-inch piece, let's make sure it's actually 10 inches right here. I'll hold it lined up, and then I'll stretch it. And I don't max it out. I kind of let it bounce a little bit, and I just think, what's comfortable? Like honestly, would you really wear it that stretched out the whole time? Probably not. But this easily can stretch 100%, like double the size, right? But that's not really where we're using it. We're probably using it down here in this 70 to 80% range. And so when I know that if my pin goes up to this 7, I just take off the 1, put a 0 on the end, and then I know. That's why I always use a 10-inch piece. So I just want you to know that that's how I did all of this here. I just kept the constant very constant. All right, so another thing that I want to be on the same page is I'm looking to use the materials I have on hand and get a good balance between wearability, ease to sew, and speed to sew. Also, I'm using a self-drafted pattern for my underwear that I copied from a pair that I already made. I know I'm not sewing any of them here, but I wanted to mention this. And lastly, if you want to know how to sew underwear using Picot, cover stitch, or fold over elastic, I have videos for you. And if you want to see this complete experiment that I did, I'll link all of these videos in the description. And I'll also add a few resources in the description for elastic. But this is a frequently changing landscape, and it's not too hard to find if you just search for it. It's whether you'll like the quality or stretch amount. That is the variable, and some of that is personal. So you just got to experiment a little bit. All right, let's carry on. I promise I'll share the results of my findings soon, but it's just important to appreciate the scope of the variables and things you want to consider when sewing your own. And I haven't seen a lot of folks underscoring this. So, they may say, use this or use that, but why, So getting back to our 3 variables regarding elastic, I have these elastics on hand, not too shabby of a, amount, but I'm kind of forced to use what I want or what I have for this project. And so this is where I'm at. So this Picot here stretches 90% right here. This one here, this one stretches 70%. This fold over here stretches 70%, and this one here stretches 60%. And I also threw in some braided elastic because I have a metric ton of this stuff, and I actually love braided elastic. I like the way it looks, and I like how firm it is. This is, I showed you this earlier. All right. So this one that I used in my experiment easily stretches 80%. We saw that. All right, so I am after the method this time. So I'm not interested primarily in which elastic is best. So I use this Picot right here, and I use this fold over elastic for my experiments. In other words, if I figure out what method is the stretchiest, then I can shop for elastic with that in mind and know that the method that's best will do it the most justice. But say I find an elastic that is super stretchy, I can use one of the lesser stretchy methods to apply it that are actually, spoiler alert, a little faster. All right, so with fabric, I'm obviously scrap busting. Underwear are so personal. I used to like a firm microfiber fabric, and I really like straight up cotton too. But lately I favor bamboo tinsel rayon knits. They're really nice and cool and super stretchy, but let's be honest, they're a little fiddly to sew too. For my experiment, I'm using this moderately stretchy cotton lycra because it's cute. I didn't have enough for underwear, and I could cut enough samples for all of my experiments. I'm sorry it's a little busy, but I'll try and make sure you can see what I'm doing. I'm keeping the fabric the same across all experiments because that's the most important, but I'll share some results using a different fabric since it makes a big impact. This shark print, it only stretches 40%. Well, that's actually pretty good. And this blue yarn dye right here, this one stretches 55%. All right, time for the experiment. I cut each piece of test fabric 10 inches wide and 4 inches tall, and I cut each piece of elastic 9 inches, and 1 inch of that 9 inches is hanging off on either end, by a ½ inch here. So essentially I'm stretching the elastic 10%, which is usually the recommended amount you do in underwear sewing. Personally, even though I hoped the cover stitch finish would come out on top on at least one of the trials, I kind of knew it wouldn't compare in stretch to a zigzag. But I like the way zigzag looks, so that's okay. The main drawback is it takes significantly longer to sew a zigzag than a cover stitch. All right, for the results. The clear winner as far as method goes, zigzag on and zigzag top stitch. I think a few of you are not surprised by that. We're not comparing elastics since I didn't have much of an assortment, but they did react a little differently. For the Picot, when you attach it with a zigzag and top stitch it with a zigzag or a cover stitch, they were equal. They were both superior as long as you attached it with a zigzag, and the Picot is usually a little stretchier than most of the others. For the braided elastic, which was sewn the same 4 different ways, the zigzag attaching and the zigzag top stitch again was the clear winner. In the fold over elastic realm, the zigzag finish was the winner, but not by much, and sewing the fold over elastic of any type of way hinders the stretch the most. The one thing that can get back a lot of the stretch you lose when sewing is your fabric choice. So if you're using a fabric that isn't the stretchiest, I recommend attaching and finishing your elastic with a zigzag stitch. But if you're using a very stretchy fabric, you can probably sew your elastic on any way you like and still hold on to a significant amount of the stretch. That being said, you'll still get a lot more stretch if you use zigzag on and zigzag top stitch. If you really need it to be stretchy, zigzag all the way. When I finally sat down to sew my own cut out underwear, I tried the fold over elastic held folded and attached as if it's Picot or braided elastic. Surprisingly, you get a lot of the stretch of the fold over elastic back if you keep it folded and sew it on. I don't know if it was this fold over elastic, but it worked pretty good. And this is the stuff I used. And so instead of wrapping it around the edge of the fabric, I just held it behind just as if it was Picot, and it worked really, really good. Okay, so I know I told you the results of the experiment and that I shared with you that I made mine, and I just thought I'd show you a little bit about each one because I still opted for a few different styles even though I knew what would be the best stretch. And I did that for a variety of reasons, mainly because of what materials I had on hand and time, because zigzag and zigzag takes so much time. So here's a pair I did out of my stretchier knit that I had. And then this one, I just used a braided elastic, overlocked it to the edge, turned it, and then zigzagged it. So I still had that stretch from the zigzag, and I used the braided. The only thing I recommend if you do this and you're using an existing pattern is definitely add the seam allowance, because I didn't. You can see this got pretty narrow here, but I was just like, let's just give it a shot, right? This right here, I used that cheaper fold over elastic and I didn't fold it. So I just overlocked it to the edge and called it good. That's it. And it's actually working really good. I'm kind of surprised. So normally this would fold right there, right? So, and I did try this. I don't have that pair here, but I did do that where I serged it on and I was like, you know, what would happen if I folded it now and then zigzagged it? I did that and it was kind of stiff and boardy. They work, they're fine, but I don't think I'll do it again. What I liked about it is it looked kind of cool with that little tiny edge, and then it looked nice and clean because the thread matched it. So it was kind of a nice look. But yeah, this is just flat. I see a lot of ready-to-wear underwear where they just have this piece of elastic sewn here. I didn't stretch this very much, so it's flipping to the outside. You can see I stretched it a little bit, not very much. But when it's on, it doesn't do that. It doesn't fold because it's narrow. So here's another pair. I did Picot because I had a lot of that black Picot, and I don't think I sewed these on camera because the black is pretty hard to see on camera. And I overlocked this on, and then I cover stitched it in the end. And these are definitely very, very stretchy, even though I did the cover stitch. So this is still very acceptable. Partly I think it's because this fabric in particular, this whatever this is, it's like a bamboo tencel rayon or something. It's very, very stretchy, and that really helps that sewing method. And so I did this method the most. I think I overlocked them on, and then I finished with a zigzag. I don't know if you can see that zigzag. You can see it better on this pair here. But if you notice, this is the fold over elastic, and I held it folded. So I just held it as one and treated it like Picot, and this works really great. This fabric in particular doesn't stretch very much. This is the pair I made that are upside down, just using up all my fabric. This fabric stretches, I think, a little bit more, but both of these are a cotton knit, so they have that going for them, but they don't stretch as much. And they're still great. They are staying put, and I love this method. I actually am considering going forward with this where I use this fold over elastic as my Picot because I just really like the way it looks. It's soft and it's not very scratchy, and then it has the option of being fold over if I want. So that's what I opted for, and I'm not saying that's the best, obviously. You can tell that there's lots of ways to do this. Definitely if you want the best stretch with whatever you're using, zigzag is going to reign supreme. So yeah, anyway, I just thought I'd share with you some of the things I made. Hope you liked the video. I tried another stretch stitch, one that came recommended, and turns out is a favorite amongst folks who regularly sew underwear, the 3-point zigzag stitch. I can definitely see why people like it. It gives it a very nice finish. You can see that the zigzags are a little more rounded, and the stretch is still great, but it does come out on the bottom with the overlock and cover stitch finishes. But if you like this look and you use a stretchy fabric, it's absolutely wonderful and you can totally use it. You'll notice I'm not sharing the percentage of stretch for each result, and there were a lot of results. The reason I'm not doing this is that it's not important as a result. It is in comparison to other tests, but if you were to use a different Picot, you'd probably come up with different percentages. It is in the experiment video if you really want to know. And I want to underscore that treating each test the same lets the method by which they were sewn shine through. It's not about the brand of Picot, but about which sewing method works best. Theoretically, if I swap out the Picot with another one, I'll still find that the same method comes out on top. Then it's about what Picot you want, or braided, or fold over elastic. Zigzag reigns. Now you can all cancel those cover stitch machines you plan on buying. Just kidding. But seriously, remember that sometimes it's worth an experiment to find out what you really need. Maybe you need a nicer zigzag machine. Until next time, thanks for watching. Please subscribe and comment. It really helps. And if you like the video, like the video. Happy sewing. And remember, I have that new thing called the Sew Guild. If you like to sew and you like talking to people about sewing and you want a really nice, calm, cool, collected space to hang out in, it's a true community. I know there's a lot of people that say they have sewing communities. This is different, I promise. And there is a free level, so check it out. sewguild.com. Thanks for watching. Bye.